mid-1990s, I attended Utah State University in Cache Valley, northern Utah. I was not much of a student or a socialite, so I spent most of my time procrastinating on doing my homework and exploring the nearby mountains. My roommates learned not to worry if I didn't come home at night because I was an outdoor enthusiast. I preferred camping under the stars to sleeping on a lumpy twin mattress in a noisy apartment complex. My summer job allowed me to work in remote places like the Front Range of the Rockies, the Selway in Idaho, and the Bob Marshall Wilderness near the Canadian border. I'd spent more time in the mountains and woods than anyone I knew, but I had never heard a howl, seen a track, or come across any evidence that would support a Sasquatch theory. I didn't even believe my father's story of a friend who had seen a hairy arm take a pie through a kitchen window. I was always comfortable around critters and had a knack for approaching them in the wild. I have had deer and elk come within feet of me while sitting down and eating my lunch. I saw a Rocky Mountain wolf in Montana before the government introduced the Canadian packs, which led to the native population going extinct. I've had both black and grizzly bears so close that I could pet them, and I have fed cow moose from my hand in the wild. The mountains near my university were steep and rugged. There were lots of places in the canyons where the brush was thick, and a person would get pretty torn up if he went through much of it. The peaks were high and beautiful when the early snowstorms dressed them in white, except for the steep cliff faces where the snow can't rest. There are several well-known caves in the mountains. Minnetonka Cave is managed by the government, and you can take a guided tour if you like to see amazing underground formations. The famous Logan Cave was a popular destination for adventurers when I was young, but it is now secured by a huge iron gate to keep people out and allow bats to fly as they please. You can park on the nearby highway and check out the entrance, and I'm certain there is at least one other cave in those hills. I know because I found it. Sometime in 1994, I was searching for new places to find adventure. It was still warm out. I was in sandals and short pants and my favorite threadbare T-shirt. I had hiked less than a mile from a rutted and washed out dirt road when I decided to climb up a talus slope to the base of a cliff. Now, hiking up those loose rocks was kind of like climbing stairs, except every so often a step would give way and start a mini avalanche. It took almost no time to reach the top of the slide. And from there, I followed the base of the cliff for several hundred yards, looking for a spot where I could safely climb to the top. One gap in the rock looked promising, and I started climbing up that chute. It was easy climbing, and when I was almost to the top, I heard a rattlesnake, and I saw it sunning itself on the rock at my eye level. Now, I'm not afraid of snakes, nor do they bother me under normal circumstances, but seeing those dark eyes and flicking tongue just inches from my face sent me into a state of hysteria. I pushed back from the rock and spun halfway around, and I launched myself back down the rock face. I landed 5 feet lower than where I jumped, and with the adrenaline pumping, I quickly gained control and landed safely. I was just coming to terms with what had happened when that stupid snake started crawling down toward me. Instead of clearing out, I assumed the position of a person being arrested, with my hands and feet spread wide against the rock while the snake crawled quickly down through the rocks in front of me. I thought about killing it and making his skin into a hat band, but instead I took a moment to admire the color patterns on his back and the intimidating shape of its head. I was grateful it was getting out of my way, and after the rattler had passed me, I resumed my climb up through the rocks to the place where the snake had been basking. At this spot was a huge rock wedged into the chute that I was climbing. My heart was still beating fast, and I looked around for other snakes. I found none, and I turned my attention to a huge rock. This boulder seemed out of place, and it felt somehow unnatural. When I climbed up on top, I realized it was blocking the entrance to a cavern. There were even scratch marks as if the rock had been moved and then replaced multiple times. I tried to move it, but that was useless. The thing had to weigh more than 500 pounds, and it was jammed in there really tight. I pulled my flashlight out to see down into the cavern, but as Murphy only knows, the light wouldn't come on. I would have to come back another time if I wanted to look back into the cave. I hiked back to my car and I returned to town. I got a sledgehammer and a hand drill, a set of wedges, and a leaf rock splitters from the geology professor that I knew. There was still plenty of light when I got back to the mountain, but as I started up the steep talus slope, the craziest hailstorm I have ever seen rolled in. My head and my back and my ears were pelted with half-inch balls of ice. The pain was intense, and I retreated as fast as I could to the trees in the canyon below. They gave me shelter, and I nursed my wounds while the hail piled up around me. And when the storm subsided, I hiked up to the cliff one more time, but for some reason I couldn't find the rocky chute I had climbed into earlier that day. I searched for hours, but it got dark and I had to leave. It was more than 6 months later before I was able to return and search for the cave. It was a beautiful spring day, but the rock slide was still covered in deep, icy snow. I hiked it easily and found the spot where I had climbed up the cliff before. I was better prepared, and I had 2 working flashlights and good tools for breaking the rock. I was so excited. I broke that boulder up in a matter of minutes. And using one of my lights, I could see that the opening got smaller as it went back into the cliff. I was never a skinny person, but I managed to squeeze my way back about 15 feet from the entrance, and I was pleasantly surprised when it opened up again into a small chamber. I shined my light around. I immediately realized that the chamber was not natural. It had been opened up and excavated by someone. The ceiling and the floor of the cavern were flat, and 4 straight walls made the room geometric. Along the side wall, I could see 3 rotten logs that had been torn up to make what appeared to be a bed of compost. I also found 6 deer hoofs. The walls were bare except for one spot that had been darkened by an ancient fire. I didn't find anything else at that time, and I assumed it was a primitive shelter that had been abandoned. I left everything as I had found it, and I decided to go back with supplies to turn the shelter into my own private man cave. It took a week or more before I had the items I wanted for the cave, and I returned with great anticipation. The first things I packed into the cave were a lantern, a cot, a butane stove, and a huge military-down sleeping bag. I was making my second haul with food and a giant bean bag when I heard rocks tumbling down the cliff. Now that's nothing unusual in the early spring, so I kept hiking and I climbed right up to the opening. And then I realized what had caused the rock fall. Another big boulder was wedged in front of the cave opening. If I had been inside when it fell, I'd still be there today. I set the beanbag down and pulled myself up on the new rock to survey the damage and assess the situation. And to my surprise, another century rattlesnake was waiting silently in the sunlight, and he looked intent on standing his ground. I had one of those feelings like I was being watched, but mostly I just laughed in spite of my situation. I was grateful not to be trapped and pretty sure it would be a bad idea to open the entrance again. My beautiful surplus sleeping bag and antique oil lantern would never keep me company in the wilderness again, but at least I got out of there alive. I tossed my beanbag down the hill and resumed climbing to the top of the cliffs. The snow at the top had melted, the sun had hit it, and the soil was saturated. I noticed some big indents in the ground that could have been footprints, and again I had the feeling that I was being watched. This time I looked up to see if I was alone. That's when I became a believer. Standing just a few feet away was a man staring at me. I say a man because he was a man, but he was not a normal fellow. He was standing with his hands on his hips, and he was giving me the look like my grandmother would have given me if she caught me stealing a cookie out of her kitchen. He didn't speak, but he stared at me for a few moments while I stared back at him. He stood fully upright, and there was no doubt that he was intelligent. He was immensely larger than me, standing at least 2 feet taller, and was much wider in the shoulders. Physically, he appeared to be exceptionally strong. He was naked. He had black hair covering most of his body, except for the black skin on his cheeks and forehead and his ears. I could tell that he had his manhood, but it was buried under a big mat of hair. I didn't stare long, but it was clear that the hair in his pelvic region was thicker than elsewhere on his body, and it provided a bit of modesty to his nakedness. The hair on his shoulders was like a thick shawl, and on his chest it thinned, and I could see through to his skin. The most striking feature I remember was that he looked very old and ancient. He was like a living fossil. I did not panic or feel scared. I don't know why, but I decided to speak to him. I said, "Hello." I told him my name and asked for his. His eyes seemed to soften for a moment, and I was sure that he understood me. But instead of speaking, he extended a huge arm, a hand, and a finger to point the way for me to leave. I walked away slowly, and I never turned to look back. Since that day, I have heard many stories of people encountering Bigfoot. Many of the stories have common features that clearly define what Bigfoot looks like. Many people comment on his distinctive smell, glowing red eyes, and exceptionally long arms, which leads me to believe they saw the same type of creature I saw. But the man I saw did not have any of those features. His eyes were piercing, but I gathered it was because he was upset with me trying to move into one of his caves. I didn't smell anything out of the ordinary, and the length of his arm seemed proportional for a person. Well, I'm old and fat now, and I doubt I could make the hike back into his cave. Maybe someday, when the snow is melting in the spring sun, I'll find a way to get back up there, and maybe when that time comes, he'll let me once again see him face to face. Maybe next time he'll even tell me his name. Okay, that was a great story. I actually spent about 30 minutes looking through this huge list of stories that I have to read to you all. And I picked this one out intentionally because, number one, I only have time to do one story in this podcast today. Number two, it just struck me as a really well-written, well thought out story, and it's really intriguing to me. I like these stories where people see something, they get older, and they want to go back and look at the area. One of the stories that really intrigued me in that way was a story I did years ago called The Hand House. You can do a search for that and find it. I can almost feel, I'm getting older. I just turned 63 back in August. And I'm starting to feel, a little nostalgia for my youth and the things that I saw and did, and love what I'm doing now. But so this story kind of struck me as interesting, so that's why I read it. Okay, in the coming days and weeks, I'll be putting more podcasts out. I have to tell you and be candid with you. I've been gone for about 2.5 weeks, and I just didn't feel like doing the podcast. I spent time with my wife. We hooked up our RV. We went down to the beach and spent a few days, and I've been doing some stuff around my place and doing a little bit of work. I'm kind of officially semi-retired. I'm just working for one customer right now, and they have little bones they pitch to me, and I knock them out, make a little extra pocket change. But I'm starting to feel the pull now that it's about to start getting cooler, to really pour myself back into this podcast. I've got Steve Lilly, number 19, done. I'm loving writing it. I know I'm about a year late on it, but I don't know. I just decided on this podcast I'd just do it when I want to, and I do it when I really feel compelled to do it. And I loved reading this story. I had a great time coming back to this. So that's kind of where I'm at. Nobody cares, but I just thought I'd let you know. So I appreciate you listening to this podcast, and we will see you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.